Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today we're Masech the Zevachim Daf Samach Beis. We are going to continue on Samach Beis and off about 8 lines from the top of the word Bishlama. So we were learning in yesterday's daf the distinction between the first and the second Beis Hamikdash, namely with regard to the Mizbeach. So the Mizbeach Achitzayin, originally the top was 20 by 20 because its entirety was 28 by 28 almost. And the reason for the extra 8 is because you had on both sides Yisoid, both sides Soivev, the Kranais of the corners, as well as Makam Hilach Kohanim. So therefore it's 4 times 4 plus 4 is 8. So therefore it ends up being 20 on the top. Now, the first Beis Hamikdash, there was a lot of people that would come and bring karbanos. But for some reason, as we saw, the second Beis Hamikdash, they made the Mizbeach HaChitzayin bigger. And the top was actually 24 by 24. And the full dimensions, which we're more familiar with, is 32 by 32. Again, 32 minus the 8 is 24. Now, the reason, as we said, is because there was Aish that came from the Shemayim. However, it didn't exist in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash. Alternatively, they made space for the Shisin, and therefore they extended the western and the southern sides. So we asked, how's that possible? How are you able to do it? So we saw this drasha that just like the Heichel, the length of Heichel, which is 60 amos, so too we could actually make the Mizbech that big as well. They didn't need to do it, wasn't as necessary to be that large, but nonetheless, that was the drasha why they were allowed to, and it wasn't a violation of the famous pasuk of Hakoil B'chsab Yad Hashem Alai Hiskil. So Bishlama, bias, I can understand the bias, Minkara Tsurasai. It's recognizable, its form. Says Rashi, Yadu Anshe Knesses HaKadoila, they understood, the men of the Great Assembly, Ma Kadosh LaAzara, what to sanctify, Ma Kadosh LaHeichel, and what to be Mekadosh to the Heichel. Shenikarim, it was recognizable to Suras Yisoida Yisachimos, the foundations of the various walls. However, even though that is something which they were able to discern, El Mizbeach Mina Yadai. How do they know exactly where to put it? Okay, so Omer Rabbi Lazar Ro Mizbeach Banoi Michael Hasar Hagadol Oimedu Makrabalav. They actually saw that there was a Mizbeach that was built, and in Michael, the great Tsar, was actually being makrab over there. So therefore, that's how we knew where it should be set up. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha Imer Afar Shel Yitzchak Ro Shemunach Ba'oisa Makom. Literally, the offer of Yitzchak Avinu was there. Therefore, that's how they knew where to place the Mizbeach. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani Imer Mikol Habayis Kulo Harecho Reach Katiris. They were able to smell the Reach HaKatiris throughout. Misham Haricho Reach Ivarim, and from there they smelled the fragrance of the limbs. Okay, so Amar Rabba B'Barchan Amar Rabbi Yochanan Shlosh Neviim Ol Imahen Min HaGoyla. There's 3 Neviim, namely, as Rashi points out, the later Neviim of Chagai, Zachari, and Malachi. They came from Goyla. Echad Sheheyed Lahem Al Mizbeach. One of them was to testify regarding the Mizbeach. So Rashi Sheish Lo Makom L'Chaisiv, that you could actually make the Mizbeach HaChitzon larger, the second one, which was, instead of being 28 by 28, became 32 by 32. The Echad Shehein Lahem Al Makom HaMizbeach. The second was to say exactly where the Mizbeach should be placed. The Echad Shehein Lahem Shemakriven Al Vabi She'ein Bias. That you can be makrivit even without a bias. Says Rashi, the Kedushas a bias, Kitchel Hashet, Kitchel Asal. Even missing the bias, you can still be makriv karbanos. But Masnisa Tanur Belezim and Yaakov Aimer Shloish Neviim, Ol Imahem and Agos, 3 of them, Echad Sheheyed Lahem Al Mizbeach. One again is to testify regarding the Mizbeach, its dimensions. Yal Makam HaMizbeach, as well as where it should be put. The second one was to tell us that you can still be makar karbanos. The echad, here's the new one, sheheid lahem al hatayra shebechsav ashuris. Says Rashi, shemetchila nitn lahem bechsav ivri. Originally, as is brought down to the Sanhedrin, it was given in a different ksav called ksav ivri, and then it was changed to ksav ashuris. Okay, Tanaban. The Karen, the top of the Mizbeach, which has these horn-like structures, in which are Amma by an Amma, as well as the Keves, the ramp leading up to the Mizbeach, the Asoid, the lower part of the first layer, the first tier, which is the Asoid, V'Rabua, the fact that it must be square, Ma'akvin. These are all things that are absolutely required, and if it's not square, then it's not kosher for karbanos. Midas arku, midas rachbo, midas komaso in ma'akvin. And it makes sense, as we said, that you can have different dimensions. It's not exact. It doesn't have to be a certain length or width or height. So how do we know this? So Omer Rav Huna Makra, because the pasuk says as follows. So let's see this pasuk. The pasuk says in Shmos Chav Zayin. So it's a very long pasuk. It says regarding the Torah Ora helps us out a lot. It says, referring to Karen, it says min hadam yitin al karnas mizbeach. So from the dam you have to put it on the kranos. So obviously it's necessary to be able to have kranos. And it also says yishbach yisod mizbach ha'oila, that certain karbanos you have to pour the blood, it says, on the aside. Okay. And it also says regarding the ramp, v'zois taras hamincha hakri v'oisa b'nei Aaron lifnei Hashem el pnei hamizbeach. So somehow that's alluding to the to the ramp, and regarding the aside, v'lakach hakayin midama be'etzba'ai, that the kohen will take from his finger v'nasan al karnos mizbach ha'oil, when he puts it on the corners, on the horns. Yes, kol dami yishbach yisod mizbech, and again it has to be spilled or poured on the side. And then lastly, regarding to it being square, it says v'yasisas mizbech atzi shitim. It should be acacia wood, and it says chamish amos arich v'chamish amos rochav ravu yeh hamizbech. It says that it must be square, very clear, and 3 amos high. So with that said, let's go back into the Gemara. So that was again all just from the Torah or numerous psukim, which seem to indicate that these are ma'akiv. So Omer Rav Huna Makra hamizbeach. Kol makom shneimar hamizbeach la'akiv. Every time it says hamizbeach, which we heard by all these different things, it comes to say it's la'akiv. So therefore, it's coming to include the karen, the ramp, the yesod, and the fact that it must be square. In which all of those psukim, as we saw already, they keep saying the word hamizbeach. Okay. In other words, in order for it to be considered a mizbeach, it must have these things. El Miyatav, that's true. Kior. When it comes to, the laver, which they before doing the avoda, they would wash their hands and feet with this kior. Well, Rabbi, according to Rabbi, v'soivev, Rav Yosi Rabbi Huda hachinami dema'akiv dechsev v'nosata oiso tachas karkov hamizbech milmata, that it was put underneath the karkov. Okay, so we'll have to see what are these different opinions. So we said this according to Rabbi, this according to Rav Yosi Rabbi Huda. Who's that? Even though those are the same shitas brought down at the beginning of our parak, that's not what we're talking about. Rather, the following machlokas between them. It says that this v'tani ezu karkov. What is this karkov which goes around the circumference of the mizbeach? So Rabbi Omer is a kior. This is what we call the kior. So again, kior typically you would think is referring to the laver, which is how I said it. But actually, Rashi says here, siyurim savim l'mala me'emtza. This actually is referring to that they drew pictures on the mizbeach itself all the way around it in the middle. So that's what it's referring to. So That's what the kior is called. So according to Rabbi, it should be ma'akev. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda Omer zeh soivev. This is what we call the decorative edge. But nonetheless, according to them, that term soivev, which is also decorative component of the mizbeach, so according to them, l'chayra, there should also be a ma'akev. The answer is in. You're right. The sign the oisa hayom nifka karen mizbeach. They became a pagam on the karen. They have you bul shel melech, and they put some like a piece of some salt to clog it up. The satmuhu. They didn't put this fistful of salt there in order that now you can use the mizbeach because it still has a pagam, because that's not really fixing it. It just doesn't look nice. But the mizbeach was still problematic. Shekol mizbeach she'ein lo keren v'keves v'yisayid v'erbu apostle. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda Omer afa sayvev. So you see, Taka is a raya that that's the case. That also, when it comes to the sayvev, it also is a problem. Okay. Tanu Rabbanon. Ezu Karkov. Okay, let's look at question 9 before we get too far ahead of ourselves. Question 9. Mal Karkov HaMizbeach Dechsib B'Kra V'im Hum Akev. So, according to Rebbe, Karkov is the kior V'tzir HaMizbeach. Those are these pictures. According to Rebbe Yehuda, that's the soivev. V'Karkov Ma'akev Kol Chad Kid Isla. And they hold it's Ma'akev. Okay. Okay. So, Tanu Rabbanon. Ezu Karkov Bein Karen LeKaren. Between each of the horns on the top of the Mizbeach, Mokum Hiluch Ragli HaKohanim. There was this amount of space for the Kohanim to be able to walk around of an Amma. So, Atu what? A Kohanim Bein Karen LeKaren Havi Azli. Is that where they would go? They would only be going between one Karen and the next. Says Rashi, V'lokish Yagil Karen HaKaren Ma'akvin Molahakif. Once you reach the Karen, you wouldn't go around it. So what exactly does this mean that you're going to go from one Karen to the next? What exactly is that referring to? So just means that that's the amount of space that the Kohanim were given to walk. It says that the Karkov was halfway, right? It was like in the midway point, like by the Chut Sikra. So Omer Rav Nachman Yitzchak Trei Havi Chad Lenoi v'Chad LeKohanim Delo Nishtarku. So there's actually two. One was just stam for beautification, and then there was another one just for the Kohanim, so that there. And Rashi said it's coming charitz. It almost was like an indentation, right? It wasn't just flat. It was almoik. It was a little bit deeper. Mamakam hamaracha misfas hamizbeach saviv. Umekiv is makam hamaracha, and basically it's in order that it shouldn't be completely smooth, but it's a little bit of indentation so that the Kohanim would be safe, so that they wouldn't like fall off. So that's the significance of it. Okay, midas. Okay. Let me just write that. Midas arko, midas rachmo, midas kamaso ein ma'akvin. So he said when it comes to the dimensions of mizbeach, that's not ma'akev. Amar Rav Mani v'vad shelo yifchasenu mimizbeach shasam Moshe. It can't be smaller than the one that Moshe Rabbeinu made in the time of the Mishkan. The Kamas Amar Rav Yosef Alma. It can't be less than an Amma. So Machaleha. So they started like laughing at him. Like, what do you mean an Amma? The pasuk says Chamish Amos Arech v'Chamish Amos Reicha v'Ravu Yeh Mizbeach. Right? It actually says the dimensions are 5 by 5 by 3 high. So what are you talking about? An Amma. So Amalei Abaya Dilma Makom Marocha Kaimer Mar. Maybe he's talking about the place of the actual burning of the mizbeach of the karbonos. Says Rashi Dahavi Amma. The top has to be an Amma. Shebeda kronos, between the kronos, umakom hiluch, as well as the place of walking. B'matin bo amasai mechol tzad. You have to deduct 2 on each side, partially amal amma. So again, basically you have the kronos, which is 1 by 1, and then you need another amma for walking. So therefore, only the middle is 1. So maybe that's what he's talking about. Really, it's 5, but we're already deducting 4, 2 for the kronos and 2 for hilach kohanim. Okay, so therefore, maybe we shouldn't be so quick to laugh. So maybe that's what he's referring to. It's 5 minus 4 is 1. So Amrle Mar de Gavarabahu Yadamai Kamina. This guy obviously is smart. He knows what he's talking about. So Karlayo, as we continue to Samach Beis and Beis, B'nei Ketayra. What does that mean? Says Rashi, B'nei Avraham Atem. You are the children of Avraham Avinu. Of a low Kizer Yitzchak Yaakov. But you're not like the Zerah of Yitzchak and Yaakov. Okay. So maybe that's somewhat of a derogatory expression to say that you're only B'nei Keturah, but you're not like B'nei Yitzchak and Yaakov. Okay. B'nei Achsad Rav Tarfin, Haviyasvi committed Rav Tarfin. So the relatives of Rav Tarfin were sitting in front of Rav Tarfin. Pasach Yomer, and so he began by quoting the following pasuk. It says in Vayikra Aleph, it says, is that what it says? No, it says in Bereshis Chavei, V'Yosef Avraham V'Yikach Ishu Shema Keturah. So he ended up getting married. So even though Avraham had a wife Hagar and he had a wife Sarah, so after Sarah died, later on, he actually married someone else by the name of Keturah. Okay, so what's the significance of that? So it says, Yosef Avraham Yikach Isha, Ushma Yoichni. His name, so Amriullah, Ketayra Ksiv. It says Ketayra, what do you mean? Yoichni. So Karlem B'nei Keturah. So they called upon him B'nei Keturah. So what exactly is going on over here? It says Rashi, Yoichni Milsa Ba'almahu Dekaimer, Kedei Liftoach Pihem. He just like said something randomly just to open up their mouths. He obviously knew that they were going to say B'nei Keturah. So Rashi, Eni Yodim L'davar B'halacha. That they obviously don't, you're not knowledgeable in the laws. Okay. Amr Abaye bar Huna Amr Rav Chama bar Guria, Gezirin She'asa Moshe, when it came to the Gezirim, Rashi says the Shnei Gizri Eitzim, there were these 2 woods, Sarch L'sadir B'rosh Mizbeach HaMaracha, and we always had to have the Kohanim bring up these woods. And Rashi says, L'tamid shel shachar b'kohen echad. In the morning we had one Kohen bring it up. However, when it came to the Tamid shel ben Arbayim, b'shnei Kohanim, we actually had 2 Kohanim bringing the wood for the Tamid shel ben Arbayim. The Gemara Masechtas Yomi discusses why in that particular way. Anyway, the Gezir Shasa Moshe, when it came to these logs of wood, right, in the days of Moshe, that they would bring up for the Talmud, Orchin Alma v'Rachman Alma. They were an Alma long and an Alma wide. For Ovian, and its thickness was Kamachak Goidish Sa. Says Rashi, Kamidus Makam Hamaracha Ba'alma Gemuda Katsara. It was kind of like narrow. Rabbi Yirmiyah Ba'alma Geduma. Again, it was a more of a narrow alma, says Rashi. Shul Yatsu Chutzal Maracha, because we weren't allowed to go outside of this area on the Mizbeach. V'yakva Kohanim L'hakif. And therefore, if the wood was too wide, it would be difficult for the Kohanim to be able to move around. So it had to be like more narrow pieces of wood. Okay. So Omer Rav Yosef, Alav Hainu the Sanya, did we not learn Al Eitzim Asher Al Eish, the wood is on the fire, Asher Al Mizbeach? What does that mean? Shol Yehi Eitzim Yoitzim in the Mizbeach Kum. It tells us that you can't have Eitzim that are protruding out at all. Tanan Hasam. Kevesh Haya with Roimish Shel Mizbeach, which is something which we've always understood. This part of our Gemara is the west. So you have the Mizbeach, which is going in this direction toward the north, and then the ramp was in the south. So you would go to the Mizbech, and you would go to the south. Okay, so that's how we understood. Oirech shloishim ushtayim al roichev sheish esri alma. So it was 32 amos long, which is similar to the Mizbech itself, which is also 32, which I guess would be 64. We'll see it's not going to equal 64, which will be a question. And its width was not 32, it was only 16. So because the pasuk says in Vayikra Aleph, that you do the shechita on the northern floor, the northern part of the Mizbech, with Hashem, V'zark when they are the Kohanim is double on Mizbech Sov, and then they would do the Zerika on the Mizbech around it. So what do we see? V'shachat also Yerachas HaMizbech Sfaina. It says that the Mizbech apparently was like in the north. Shehei Yerach but Safin, the foot of the Mizbech is in the north. Upana B'daram, and its face, if you will, is in the south. Namely, the Kevesh, the ramp, was in the south. So Ema Yerach but Safon Upana B'Safin. Maybe the ramp was also in the north. So Marava Rami Gavra A'apeh. What does that mean? Says Rashi. Let's see if we can find it. Ufana B'Daram. So Ka'adam HaYoshev Zokov. So why don't we say that he's like it's standing straight? So he says Rami Gavra A'apeh. Shir Ba'adam HaShaychiv Arza. It's got to be like a person who's like lying down, not standing up. Normally, Abai Adarabba, Toretz V'Oisiv Gavra. Maybe we're talking about a person who's like stood up completely. So there, his head and his feet are in the same place, right? Not that it's like a person's lying down, so his head and his feet are in different parts, but rather, and it's like a person in which maybe standing up, right? So maybe it's like you're standing. So therefore, the head and feet are in the same place, right? The same place. So it's a kasha. So here's the north. So Amalei Revuaksiv. It says it's square. So what? So the fact that it says it's square, it says Ba'adam Roivetz Umoishkam Shir Hakosov. Okay. I thought we needed the Mir Ravua, that you have to square it off. And it can't be round. Maybe that's all it's coming to tell you. Not that it's like square, that therefore the part of the Mizbeach is in the north and the Kevesh is in the south. No, Miksiv Meruba V'Tamech Miksiv Robuts or Mulei Ravuaksiv the Mashmahachi. Can mean either way. But Tanam Aisel Mahacha, the son of Yehuda Omer, he says, based on this pasuk, it says Vazar Arba Esri Oirich. It says that in times of Yecheskel, it says the Azara was 14 in length and 14 in width. El Arbas Riva Eha, it was squared. Vakvul Saviv Oisachatzi Alma. Okay, so what do we see? And we also Pinais Kadim, and it says at the end of the pasuk, in order to go up, it was Pinais Kadim, like you were like facing like toward it was in the east. Okay, so you started off going ascending and started doing in the east. So what do we see from that? Kol pino shiata painu ella derech yamin lemizrach. So you always start off by turning to your right, and by turning to your right, that's the east. Now, how is that possible? It's only if the ramp is in the south. You go up the ramp by turning right, so the first corner that you hit is you're going east. So therefore, that's a raya that the Kevesh must have been in the south. The Eima Smoil Lemizrach, maybe to the left. The Tani Rabbi Yechizkiah, Yam Shasa Shlomo. When it came to the Yam Shlomo, this huge mikvah, which was held by these 12 different images of of cows. So v'oimed al shneim asar amudim, it was on 12 pillars of bakar, like cattle. Shloisha painim safaina, 3 were in the north. Shloisha painim yama, and then 3 were in the west. So let's think about the direction. We're in the north, and we go in 3 in the west. Shloisha painim negba, 3 in the south. Shloisha painim mizracha, and then 3 going east. So this is mentioned in the pasuk going counterclockwise, which is telling us that's the same way on the Mizbech. The Kohanim have to also go am I doing the right way? Counterclockwise, which means they would hit the east corner first. They would go up the ramp, the big kevesh, the kevesh gadol, and as we said, right, this is the north, and this is the east. So they would start off hitting the southeastern corner, then the northeastern corner, then the northwest corner, and then finally the southwest corner of the Mizbeach, right? So that's just how it was done. Kol pina shiata painoli ela derech yamin lemizrach. So that's how we see from this pasuk. Hahuma boile legufa. Now we need that pasuk to just tell us, like, just pashut shot of the pasuk. Okay, so imkain ponim lumli. So why does it say this way? It must be coming to tell us this din again, that the mizbeach was in the north, but the kevesh gadol was in the south, and you started off going toward the east, and then you keep moving counterclockwise, as we learned from the Yam Shel Shlomo. Shomer Shmuel bar Yosi ben Lukunya. That's Rav Yosi. He asked the question. Rav Shimon ben Yoichai. So he said that Avir Yesh ben Kevesh l'Mizbeach. There was actually a small space between the ramp and the Mizbeach itself, right? So you could, in that case, the meat can pass over the ground, actually, because when you go up the ramp, there's going to be, not that it's literally touching his back, there's actually a small gap. So therefore, the karbanos, when it went up, or the emurim, it passed over the ground. There was actually, you could look down from the top of the ramp, before you hit the mizbech, there was a small space of airspace. That's what the Rashbi says. So it says, we connect the basar and the dam. And we made other drushes, but over here we have a different drusha. Ma dam bezrika, just like when it comes to dam, you have to throw it. Basar bezrika. So when it comes to the basar, it's bezrika. What does that mean, bezrika? So what this is alluding to is that it's necessary. Let's see if we have Rashi. Madam oila, says Rashi, she'oimid ba'aretz, when you're standing on the ground, v'zayrik min a kli, you're throwing from a kli, alma avir yesh, there's obviously space between you're throwing it and the mizbeach, umachmas avir hu tzarich zrika, and because there's air, there's a space. That's how we call it zrika, because there's a separation between you and the mizbeach. She'oimid b'kevesh v'zarek el aver ha'avir u'maracha. So we say there's the same thing when it comes to the basar, that it needs to pass over the ground, just like the dam has to pass over some element of airspace before it hits the mizbeach. So shani oimer oimid b'tzad maracha v'zarek. Said you could stand by the side and throw it. Armalei kashu zarek l'maracha deloikahu zarek. O maracha she'enu delukahu zarek. O l'maracha she'enu delukahu zarek. So avi oimer maracha delukahu zarek. Right. So what's the thing? You're throwing it and it is lit. So hasam mishum lo efsher. Over there, it's lo efsher otherwise. You have to throw it that way because it's like a burning fire, if you will, right? So because of that, says Rashi, v'hasam mishum lo efsherhu. Yal korcha kiyasa kral hashminan asa Diyesh Aver being Kevesh Mizbeach. It must be coming to tell you this extra din that there was space between the Kevesh and the Mizbeach. Let's see the Rashi before that. It says, Kashu Zarik Umaracha Daluka Hu Zarik. Klemer Mishum Ha Lomali Krab Shita Dalkarcha Hu Zarkai. Of course you have to throw it. Share Ein Yochel Lasader Saviv Al Rasha Eitzim. You can't go by the wood. Shein Hamaracha Deluka Sham El Himena V'Halom Makam Shamaracha Dolekas. You go to a place where it's already lit. So I guess you have no choice. Okay. So that itself is not a chiddush, but therefore this pasuk must be coming to tell you the chiddush that there is a space between the ramp and the mizbeach, and that's what we learn from Yisrael Secha Basam Adam. So Havi Omer Lumaracha Deluka Hu Zarik husband shall after. So Papa Omer Kidam Madam Aver Karka Mafsikoi Basar Aver Karka Mafsiko. There's just separation. Okay, let's look at question 10. Question 10. What do we learn out from this pasuk regarding the dam and the basar? So just like the dam is rika, the aver, the karka is mafsik. So to the basar, when you throw it, the aver of the karka is mafsik between the kevesh and the mizbeach. There's space. Okay. Omer Rabbi Huda. Snake voshim katanim yotzim in kevesh. So here we have a beautiful picture. In addition to the big ramp, which we'll just call the Kevesh Agadol, as the picture demonstrates down here, there was also two other ramps. There was a Kevesh Katan, which went to the side, on the southwestern side. So this way they could go down that ramp after they did all their blood applications and everything on the Mizbeach. And also, there's a Kevesh Katan to go to the Soivev on the southeastern side of the Mizbeach. So let's look in the Gemara. Shnei Kavashim Katanim Yotzim Min Kevesh Shemehen Painim Li Yisaid L'Soivev. One goes to the Yisaid and goes to the Soivev. Umuv Dolim Min Mizbeach. They're separated from the Mizbeach. Moe Nima, a very small amount. Nishim Shnemar Saviv, because the pasuk says Saviv. So that teaches us that is the requirement. It says Rashi, Shehekev Mizbeach Koldahu, that there has to be an entire circumference around the Mizbeach. V'yehavi mechubarim shuv enu hekef. So we kind of want it to be square. So if there is, so everything is even. But if you have the kevesh, which is connected directly, so then it's considered to be like mechuber, and therefore it's a problem. I feel mechut in adam yochel soivoy. Okay, so that's the reality. So if you connected it, it wouldn't be square. Ravua, he says that we learn that from the fact that it has to be square. So what's the difference? You're learning the same thing. You can think it could even be a different shape without even corners, round off. Because Rabbuah has to have corners. Because Rabbuah it could be rectangular in shape. So because it has to be square. Tanan Hasam, HaKevesh v'hamizbeach, the Kevesh in the Mizbeach was Shishim Ushtayim, which again is problematic, which the Gemara asks, Hani Shisin v'Arbahavi? L'chayr should be 64. 32, which we know the Mizbeach was 32 by 32, the second base of Mikdash, that Mizbeach HaChitzayin. But we also said the ramp was 32, so that's 64. So how are we saying 62? Nimsa Parech Alma al Yisoid v'Alma al Soivev. There was an overlap of two almos. That, as you can see in these pictures, the Kevesh Agadol went over the Yisoid and also the Soivev. So therefore, it didn't, because again it was tiered like a cake is the Mizbeach. So therefore, the ramp didn't hit the side or the side, but went over it. So therefore, kind of like absorbed 2 of the 32 amos of the Mizbech HaChitzon. So therefore, the ramp was 32, and the Mizbech is like was only 30. So that's why we got to 62. Okay, fine. Let's finish up this daf. Samach Gimel Amud Aleph. Amar Rabbi Barchama, Koil Kivshik Kvashim Sholosh Amos La'ama. Chutz mikivshay shel mizbech shehaya sholosh amos umechsa ve'etzba v'shlish etzba b'zach rusa. Okay, we obviously need to see a lot of Rashis on this. So let's see what is Rashi saying here. All the ramps, the kavashim gedolim, the katanim shahayu sham, hayohen shipua, it had a slope. Sholosh amos la'ama. 3 amos to an amma. In other words, every 3 amos that it went up in diagonally, you covered an amma in height. It was a 3-to-1 ratio. Chutz mi kevesh agadol. Shel mizbech she'oilin b'masa evarim kvedim. There you had very heavy things that you had to bring up. It had to be at a different angle. It couldn't be a 3-to-1 angle. That's what it says. All the ramps were sholosh amos la'ama, right? So sholosh amos la'ama is again going 3 to 1 ratio. Chutz mikivsher shel mizbeach, the mizbeach, because you had to bring so many heavy things. Sholosh amos umechsa ve'etzba v'shlish etzba b'zachrusa. So again, basically, instead of it being a 3-to-1 ratio, it covered like 3.5, and an etzba and a third of an etzba. Says Rashi. Haruchol alma sholosh alma sumeksa ve'etzba v'shlish etzba. Kishe tintin l'chol alma sholosh umeksa hari lamid v'achas umeksa. Tein oid tes etzba'is v'tein shlish. So basically, he's explaining it. How is it possible that it hit the top at this angle? So again, the angle was not 3-to-1 because it was 3-to-1. We said that the mizbeach was 32. Wide. Obviously, we'd have to figure out the ratios of a right triangle. But the point is that if it's 32, right? So then it actually would have, let's say it would be 32 at the angle, right? And then it would be 10. It would be 10 up, right? So then it would be 30. There would be 30 to 10, but we know it was 32, so it was longer than the 3-to-1 ratio because it needed to be a little bit not such at a great slope because it was harder to be able to lift up a lot of very heavy carbonos. So therefore, it was. The ratio was 3.5 to 1, some in that ratio. Okay, and Rashi explains how we can get to that proper dimension. Okay. Okay, we're going to stop there. Let's look at question TA12. Mahu karkov shoyi b'kir hamizbeach. What is this karkov? So we mentioned Ezu karkov. Rabbi Omer zakir. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda Omer soivev. Let's see what he writes over here for question TA12. B'karkov shebekir hamizbeach on the wall. So pligatano ikir or sovev. B'hoya begova 6 amos, so 6 amos high. The karkov shalomala hayachritz. There was this indentation of shtei amos. Memakom hiluch ragli kohanim, the place where the kohanim would walk. Ad sfas hamizbeach, until the edge of the mizbeach shalo kadei shalo yachliku, so they wouldn't like slip, basically. Okay. That's TA 12. Okay. We don't have another question there. TB 9. So it has to be, the answer is Kior and the Soivev, right? Which is what I wrote, and I think that's what they're looking for. Adkan.